America first doesn't have to mean selling out our friends to our enemies and severely damaging U.S. influence abroad for the foreseeable future. But apparently today it does. I mean, wait till you see what's being put together here, because this is not good for the United States. So yesterday, the United States voted alongside Russia against a UN resolution condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This was on the 3-year anniversary of the invasion. And you heard that right. The U.S. voted with the invader against the country that was being invaded. Now, we're going to get into the texts of these resolutions, but at a high level, this resolution advanced a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. It called for de-escalation, early cessation of hostilities, and a peaceful resolution. Now, the United States joined Russia, Israel, North Korea, and Belarus, and others in voting no. Total 18 countries voted against, 93 voted in favor, and 65 abstained. Notably, China decided to sit this one out. Abstaining is an option, and the U.S. has done it quite a bit. But in this case, again, on the 3-year anniversary of the invasion, the United States decided, let's not abstain. Let's vote with Russia on this one, which is a little bit hard to imagine. Now, I should call out that in the group of countries in favor of this, and this is going to be important later in tying this back to why this is so detrimental to U.S. policy abroad for the foreseeable future, a lot of our allies here. We've got Korea, the Philippines, South Korea, a lot in Asia Pacific, right? Australia, New Zealand, quite a few of our friends around the world voted in favor of this. Now, we are going to get into the details of these different resolutions, but the only U.S. government response to this question of why vote no, why vote with Russia on this at all, came in an exclusive interview with Secretary Rubio done by Breitbart, where he said that the United States voted against a United Nations resolution measure bashing the Russians for the war in Ukraine earlier in the day because it was antagonistic and ran counter to the efforts to bring both sides to the table and end the war. So it wasn't very nice to the Russians, is my takeaway here. So let's dive into these 2 resolutions. And I should note that this resolution has been put forward before, almost word for word, 2 years ago. And the United States voted yes, albeit under a different administration. The minor change here is this resolution added in something about how it's bad that North Korea has troops there, and that's actually escalating the conflict. But let's go through this. I highlighted what I thought could possibly be offensive to the Russians. We'll call it out. Noting with concern that the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation has persisted for 3 years. Seems pretty accurate. Reaffirming its commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders extending to its territorial waters, and reaffirming that no territorial acquisition resulting from the threat or use of force shall be recognized as legal. Those are important. We're going to come back to those in a minute because I think that's key to what the United States is actually up to here. Condemning all attacks against civilians and civilian objects, including those that are critical energy infrastructure, seems highly controversial, right? Calls for a de-escalation, an early cessation of hostilities, and a peaceful resolution of the war against Ukraine. Seems very reasonable. Achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. That one is highlighted because in the U.S. resolution that we'll move to here next, they left out one of those words. Demands that the Russian Federation immediately, completely, and unconditionally withdraw all of its military forces from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, and its demand for an immediate cessation of the hostilities by the Russian Federation against Ukraine, and emphasizes the need to ensure accountability for the most serious crimes under international law committed. All of that seems like the things here that could have been viewed as offensive to Russia. And you get into this challenge with the United Nations where you say, hey, these are just words. It's kind of a toothless organization. And I would agree that it's pretty toothless at this point. But the argument over words is what the United Nations does. And if these words don't matter, then why vote against it, I would say. So let's take a look at the U.S. resolution that's put forward here, because one of the arguments was the U.S. voted no because we had our own that we wanted to put forward. Well, this is our own. 3 sentences. And the key point that I want to call out here, first off, no mention of territorial integrity or anything like that at all, which I think is important. It says it implores a swift end to the conflict and further urges a lasting peace between Ukraine, and the Russian Federation. Remember I said that was in the other one here? Achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. This document was not created from scratch. It was, again, almost word for word from one the United States agreed to 2 years ago. So this text was out there. You could have started here. So if we're going to say that the United Nations is just a bunch of words and it doesn't actually matter, then why did some of these words actually matter to the United States as they put together this next resolution? Now, I should note that that specific text was agreed upon and sent forward to the United Nations Security Council, where it passed in a vote of 10-0. Nobody vetoed this. However, Denmark, France, Greece, Slovenia, and the United Kingdom did abstain. So this U.S. text did make it into the record in the United Nations. Now, when I said there's something deeper going on here beyond the U.S. just wanted their own resolution, I think what's happening is that the United States has already agreed with Russia to cede Ukrainian territory for future United States economic interests. And it's kind of dark. There's a moral side of me that just hates what I just said, but if I'm reading between the lines here, I think that's already in the works, and that means that the United States would never have voted yes on that resolution. In fact, it was better for our negotiating position to vote no, because we've already agreed to certain things that would be directly contradictory to what is in that resolution. Here's what I'm getting at. If we look at the ceding of Ukrainian territory to Russia, we've already seen this from both Russian and U.S. officials for some time now. A few weeks ago, February 12th, Secretary of Defense Hegseth at NATO kind of initiated all this talk when he said that, let's make sure we get to the right spot here. I think I scrolled right past it. Stating that durable peace in Ukraine can only be established by merging allied strength with a realistic battlefield assessment. Ukraine should recognize that it would be an unrealistic objective to try to return Ukraine to its pre-2014 borders. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. So a quick look at the map here in Ukraine. Of course, the fighting going on in the east and the south. These areas in the red and pink are occupied by Russian forces right now. This purplish pink area, Crimea and in the Donbass, that's 2014. So when you say pre-2022 borders, you're essentially removing all of this orangish red back to Ukraine. When you say pre-2014 borders, it would be the removal of Russia from the Donbass and Crimea. And Hegseth, right away, in one of his first public statements at all, said that's off the table. And he got a lot of pushback. The U.S. got a lot of pushback from our European allies and from Ukraine going, what are you doing? Giving in to Russian demands before we're even at the negotiating table. But I think if we look at that in the context of everything else that's happening, it's pretty clear that that is the plan, is to allow Russia to retain control and ownership of the territory that they have conquered so far in Ukraine, taken in Ukraine. That was verified by TASS, Russian media, just yesterday, where they said the goals of the special military operation, despite the start of diplomatic efforts to settle the solution in Ukraine, have not been achieved, and the territories of the Russian Federation are not the subject of negotiations. Now, again, when they say the territories of Russia, a couple different ways to look at that. One, Kursk, but I feel like there probably are going to be wanting to negotiate the expulsion of Ukrainian forces from Kursk because Russia has not been able to do that themselves quite yet. But these territories here, Russia held a referendum, after they had pushed all the Ukrainians out and brought in their own military forces, and at the gunpoint held a referendum where, shocking, I know, 98, 99% voted in favor of joining Russia. And then Russia said, look at that. This is now Russian territory. And according to Russian media today and the Kremlin today, that's not a part of the negotiations. These are off the table. That is Russian territory, full stop. Now, President Trump yesterday kind of added to this theory, if you will, that there's an economic deal being made here behind the scenes with Russia to kind of divvy up Ukrainian territory, when he said, following a meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron, I'm in serious discussions with Vladimir Putin of Russia concerning the ending of the war, and also major economic development transactions which will take place between the United States and Russia. Talks are proceeding very well. That was seconded, again, by TASS, Russian media, who said Putin confirmed Trump's words that Russian and U.S. companies are discussing major economic projects within the framework of the Ukrainian settlement. The only way that I can read that, I'm going to leave this up on the screen for a minute here, is we are divvying up the spoils of war between the United States and Russia. Putin and Trump have designated certain companies, it sounds like, according to this task report, assuming that it is proven correct. However, it does align with other reports we're seeing out of Russia and the United States, kind of hinting that this is in the works. That means that Putin and Trump would have designated certain companies within our respective countries to partner for some sort of future economic benefit in Ukraine, or as Russia puts it here, the Ukrainian settlement. Now, what's not entirely clear at this point is if Russia refers to this as Russian territory and it's not up for negotiation, does Ukrainian settlement then mean the territory of Ukraine that is currently held by the Ukrainian government? Now, a lot of the conversation around all of this and some possible deal, an economic deal to end the war, has been focused around the rare earth minerals, earth deposits in Ukraine. And we should note that a lot of those are in the eastern portion of the country. Not all, a lot. This area here on the right, of course, is currently occupied by Russian forces. So if the U.S. wanted access to those through anybody, it would have to be through Russia. Now, there was a deal thrown out a couple days ago. It's being reported by Axios now. They, I believe, actually have the document itself and ran through some of the points there. $500 billion deal, and the key component here is, as reported by Axios, it expresses a desire that Ukraine remain free, but does not specify any U.S. military commitment. That, in terms of military commitment, that's, of course, any security guarantees. And it apparently also, from what, in my reading of the draft, does not say anything about the continuation of U.S. military aid at all. It's essentially, we're going to have a business partnership with you, and you should interpret that to mean that we are going to protect you, but that will not be in writing, is my reading of the situation. Now, when you're looking at any deal like this, there's always going to be a line between an opportunity and exploitation. And I should say right now that I don't think something like this should be off the table. You know, the realist in me thinks that, you know, even when we are coming to the defense of our allies in any way, shape, or form, I don't think it's ever an unreasonable conversation to say, hey, is there a way where we can both benefit from this? You know, I do think we are benefiting, personally, the United States, from the degradation of Russian military force and the, you know, continuing to support a sovereign Ukraine. I think that is a benefit of itself, but I'm not offended in the least to hear that there could be some sort of economic negotiations going on to, you know, maybe benefit the United States even more. I think that should be in the cards. However, there's a line that can be crossed. And in this case, a purely objective observer, somebody coming from the outside, not looking out for the best interest of the United States, not looking out for the best interest of Ukraine, just looking at this deal on its merits, would come to the conclusion that this is a very exploitative deal, right? I mean, if somebody were to come to you and say, I'll pay you $1,000 for a week of work, maybe you'll take that opportunity, maybe you won't, maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not. But if they say, I'll pay you 10 cents for 40 hours of work, you would say that that is exploitative, right? And you're like, no, I'm not gonna do that. That's ridiculous. This deal appears to, this $500 billion US deal appears to push into that category. It's how Ukraine has presented it so far. It's how Europe has presented it so far. It could be a big economic win for the United States, but I think in all other categories, it's in that negative. And the reason I say that is when you push something that is this aggressive, this extreme, there's a couple downfalls. First and foremost, our allies around the world are looking at this and wondering, if we partner with the United States in any capacity, does this mean that when we are in our time of need, at our weakest, that they may or may not support us, but they are definitely coming for our resources and our assets, and they're going to try to rob us when we're down? That has to be a thought to a lot of our allies, certainly to a lot of the Europeans right now. The second piece is when there is a unfair looking deal, we'll leave it at that, it opens the door for other people to step in and say, we'll do you one better. That appears to be what the European Union has just done within the last day. It looks like, we haven't seen the terms of this deal, that the EU has presented a similar deal, albeit more acceptable to Ukraine. The only thing we've seen at this point in terms of what might be different here is they said the added value Europe offers is that we will never demand a deal that is not mutually beneficial. And again, if you're looking at the terms that the U.S. laid out, it's not entirely clear that there's a mutual benefit there. It's kind of strong-arming Ukraine into handing over some of their natural resources with the hope that that would lead to, I don't know, U.S. support sometime down the road for their sovereignty. Now, this deal looking at this, if this was, 1, 2, 3 years ago, I think there could be a real conversation to be had, right? You give up more to the United States, but you get a larger military, United States, than Europe. You get arguably a stronger deterrent against Russian aggression and a larger defense industrial base to prevent or to provide military equipment to Ukraine. But you have to give up more. Then with Europe, you give up less, but smaller defense industrial base, smaller military forces, and arguably less of a deterrent to Russia. That would have been a real conversation, I think, just within the last couple of years, but not today. To me, this looks like a much more appealing deal to Ukraine, and it probably is going to push the United States to the sidelines. And the reason I say that is that just yesterday, you have European leaders of NATO countries in Kyiv on the 3-year anniversary of the war, pledging additional military support. There's talk of creating some sort of alliance within Europe itself, excluding the United States, to provide a degree of security guarantee for Ukraine. From Ukraine's perspective, Europe is in this for the long haul. Conversely, again, within just the last couple days, we have the United States that voted with Russia. Call it a symbolic vote if you want. Say it doesn't matter or whatever. This was on the anniversary that Russia invaded Ukraine. And the U.S. said, actually, we're going to vote with Russia on that one. We've got this $500 billion deal that looks rather exploitative on the surface. And within the last couple days, we have the Speaker of the House, Johnson, saying there's no appetite in the United States for continuing to send military aid. Or I guess what he said specifically was a new military aid package to Ukraine. From Ukraine's perspective, that European deal is probably looking a lot more enticing than anything the United States can put together right now. Europe looks like they're with them for quite a while. Why would Ukraine, looking at these two options, veer more towards the United States? And the problem there is not just one. Now, quickly, I should say that I imagine folks will look at this and say, this is Trump's art of the deal. This is 5D chess, right? All you idiots out there just don't understand what he's up to. He finally got Europe to come to the table and create some partnership with Ukraine to guarantee their security for the long haul. Maybe. But assuming that is correct, that means that all of these talks with Putin and about economic agreements that Trump himself is saying and that Putin is confirming, it means all of that is just nothing or a show, right? A distraction. But do you think that it's possible that could have been prompted or pushed forward at all without looking like we're selling out Ukraine in their time of need, turning our back on all of our allies, some of our oldest allies in Europe? How do you think that looks to our allies in the Pacific? That's important. This is where I'm getting at. This is the kind of thing that's going to harm us for the long term, because it's no question that the United States is trying to prioritize China. I mean, if we go back to some of those statements from Secretary Hegseth at that same meeting, he talked about how the United States needed to prioritize its borders and facing a peer competitor in China, saying that the United States prioritizes its attention to these threats. European allies must lead from the front. You can find countless examples of U.S. officials, and of course we have President Trump's son, just like yesterday, saying we are going to focus more on China. That, by all accounts, appears to be a desire, whether or not it's actually going to happen. We have a lot of allies in Asia Pacific, especially given how any sort of conflict there would play out. We need our allies there, similar to how we need our allies in Europe for any war that we might participate in against Russia. We need someplace to base out of. The similar would be true in the Pacific, arguably more so. South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines. If you are any of those countries and you're watching this play out right now, is your takeaway great? The U.S. is moving on from Europe, and now we will get their full attention because, God forbid, something happens here with China. We know they have our back. Or do you think any one of those allies are looking at this and going, oh, shit, if the U.S. is so quick to sell out some of their longest friends and strongest alliances for a possible economic deal in a conquered territory with the aggressor nation that is Russia, what chance does Taiwan have against China? Are we really going to go back up South Korea if North Korea gets a little more aggressive? These signals are not good. If I'm one of those countries, there's no way I'm looking at this and saying, yeah, I'm confident. I'm confident the United States has our back. It is sending the exact opposite signal, what we need to be sending to our allies in the Asia Pacific region. Now, fortunately, there has been just a little bit of pushback here. By and large, across the U.S. government, Republicans and Democrats have all been pretty quiet, if not agreeing to this stance that I should remind you again saw the United States voting with North Korea and Russia against the vast majority of our allies. Generally pretty quiet in D.C. right now. We do have a couple Republicans at this point that have spoken up. Senator John Curtis, I believe, of Utah, said, quote, "I was deeply troubled by the vote at the United Nations today, which put us on the same side as Russia and North Korea. These are not our friends. This posture is a dramatic shift from American ideals of freedom and democracy. We all want an end to the war, but it must be achieved on terms that ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security and that deter Putin from pursuing further territorial ambitions." That is going to come across like some sort of partisan statement or an anti-Trump statement or something. But if you said those exact same words, like any time over the last, 80 years, there would have been across partisan lines in the United States, people saying, yeah, sounds about right. You could say that to most of our allies around the world over the last 80 years, and they would have said, yeah, that's the American stance. That's the thing. But not today. Times are changing. Now, in the House, we have Representative Don Bacon, another Republican here, who said, quote, "The Trump administration royally screwed up today on Ukraine. The vast majority of Americans stand for independence, freedom, and free markets, and against the bully and the invader." I think so, but I'm not sure that's the direction we're heading in right now. Again, when you look at the combination of Trump's statements saying that they are talking about economic partnerships with Russia, and then Russia coming out saying, yes, we're talking about that in the framework of the Ukrainian settlement, add to that the idea that the ceding of territory from Ukraine to Russia might be on the table, it doesn't necessarily look like the stance of the United States government right now is, as Representative Bacon puts it, standing for independence, standing for freedom, standing for free markets, and against the bully and the invader. This vote, these actions in recent days are the exact opposite of that. So we'll see if anything changes in the near term. But as mentioned, how this is playing out right now is bad for the United States in the short term, in the medium term, and the long term. This is not going to be beneficial to us one bit. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.